Hello and welcome to Wide Angle. The turmoil in Hong Kong. Who is right and who is wrong? To discuss this and other issues that will grow out of this particular discussion, we have a very imposing panel with us. We have on my extreme right Ambassador MK Bhadra Kr, who specializes in this subject, and then Professor S D Muni, who recently spent so much time in Singapore and watched this area very, very closely. And then, of course, Ambassador P Shukla, who studies everything with greatest care. And let me start with you, Bhadran. Hong Kong's next chief executive will be directly elected. So what's wrong with that?
Yes, I think it's a very big statement you have made, because it draws attention to how much Hong Kong has changed. Yes. Since Hong Kong came to the Chinese hands. There was no trace of democracy in the British time at all.
Right.
And China, after it took over, it promised one country, two systems, and by and large it kept its word. And something which we don't think of at all in India today, except perhaps Chelmsford Club in Delhi, you have in Hong Kong, you know, Somerset Street, Exeter Street, and so on. You know, they have all been retained as they are. They have not even been changed into Chinese names. And the first traces of democracy appeared, in fact, after the Chinese took over. What is taking place today is a finessing of that process which began after the Chinese took over. Now, it all boils down to the under the basic law, the Chinese insistence that the candidates will be predetermined out of a panel of candidates. The people would have that entire total freedom to, in a very free and fair election, very transparent, will select. The students are saying that will not do. They need to further the frontiers immediately. So this is, when you say turmoil, you have to see that this is spearheaded primarily by college students, university students, and school children. That must be clearly understood. Then there is also a very strong economic dimension to this, because at the time that Hong Kong changed hands, it was a very flourishing entrepôt. You know, it was much more affluent than the rest of China. Now what has happened is the locus has shifted, and Shanghai has simply sped away, overtaking, and a string of other Chinese cities on the eastern seaboard, that Hong Kong looks a little bit backward now. You know, so there is a growing uncertainty about it as to its future. You know, in a China which is growing at so fast, and the disparity that was there, the lead that Hong Kong was there as the most affluent part, is a thing of the past. You know, it's
is that Professor Muni, is that the reason? What Bhadran is saying is that Hong Kong is now relatively backward, and backwardness, he says, is relative to all that has happened on the Chinese mainland, particularly in Shanghai and so on. Now that surely is not the reason behind the students coming out on the street, because by all accounts, by every other indice, the economy in Hong Kong is doing very well.
Yes, I think you are right, because there is a decline in the Hong Kong's contribution to Chinese GDP. Earlier it accounted for about 12%, 12 plus. Now it is 3.4 or 3.5. So relatively its contribution in the Chinese economy has come down, no doubt. But that in no way is an indication of the pauperization of Hong Kong. That there is a still great deal of prosperity. Of course, the distribution of income may not be equal, and there are problems. Why the students are agitating are for two very simple reasons. They are saying that the candidates would be selected by a party nominated collegium of 1200 people, and in that the party collegium for any candidate must have more than 50% support, which means any candidate who is put out would essentially be acceptable and according to the Beijing preferences. That is one thing. So they are saying that stop this. and let candidates even from outside come up there. Why they are raising this question is because their fear is that when it is a Beijing dominated system, they have their own experiences, that they don't get jobs, people come from the mainland, occupy some of the critical positions, and democracy was promised to them. It is in the, as Bhadran said very rightly, one country, two systems, and they said two system means full democracy, universal suffrage, but that was deferred until 2017. So the 2017 is coming,
right,
and the whole struggle is for the 2017 elections. That in 2017 people are saying we want our own representative to be put up, and we will choose whosoever is there.
Ambassador P Shukla, you heard our two panelists. Now the view is that one country, two systems is, and also there was a promise, it entails a promise that there will be absolute democracy. Now that is not coming, and hence the agitation, because it is nigh. It is happening in 2017. What is the immediacy? I mean, it's 3 years away. So why is it happening today? Is there any, just I want you to reflect, has it anything to do with the fact that in 2016 there will be a new administration in Washington DC, and therefore they would rather settle these things while the support base outside is the same? I'm just asking.
Well, look, there are a lot of interlinkages. I hadn't thought about this, but it's certainly a very intriguing point of view. Look, let's begin by putting a little perspective on what we are talking about. The first thing is that this is part of a wider pattern of unrest that we are seeing within China. It was Tibet until about 2 years ago. In the last 2 years, it has been focused on Xinjiang, and that continues to be very restive. Now it has spread to Hong Kong. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is the Chinese economy is doing rather badly. You know, the headline statistics conceal the real extent of problems facing the Chinese economy. If you would like to go deeper into this, I will actually quote to you a very recent Chinese report. When I'm analyzing the Chinese economy for public purposes, I only go by Chinese figures and Chinese statements. I'll be very happy to delve into this a little more. Short point is that we may not know it, but the Chinese leaders jolly well do, that economically also they are stumbling. Now, as to the facts of the case, the Chinese position is a violation of the commitments they have made in the past. It is a violation of the basic law on 2 points. Number one, they have said that apart from foreign affairs and defense, Hong Kong has absolute liberty to pursue whatever laws and systems it wishes to. Number two, I think this is Article 26 of the basic law, which says that permanent residents of Hong Kong, that is all those who are citizens and all those who are people who are permanent residents only of Hong Kong and have no right of abode in any other country in the world. That's their catchment area. Permanent residents shall have the right to vote and the right to stand for election in accordance with law. So they have both the freedom to vote and the freedom to stand for elections. In other words, the demand from the side of both the students and the political forces, it's not only students, is well within the four corners of the law. Timing wise, the reason is really quite simple. From 2007 onwards, the Chinese have taken a view that the agitation in Hong Kong was that the 2012 election should be on the basis of universal suffrage. At that time, the NPC in Beijing took the decision that it will happen not in 2012 but in 2017. So I think they are committed to that, and to my mind that explains the timing rather better than the fear of a more hawkish person in the White House come 2017, although I'm pretty sure that they would have thought about it. One last point I want to make. You know, we have this view that the Chinese think far ahead, 10 steps ahead, 100 steps, 100 years forward and all that. They are making one big mistake over here, because they are undermining the saleability of the one country, two systems model. And remember, the big prize is not Hong Kong, is not Macau, it is Taiwan. And even a well-disposed president like Ma Ying-jeou has made a statement saying one country, two, just recently after the agitation, that the one country, two systems model is not acceptable to Taiwan.
There you are. So we have now the table is open. What Prabhat says, he is somehow going to dwell. I'll ask him later. The economic dimension, he believes he is much more pessimistic about the Chinese economic story in the near future than most writers seem to be at the moment. And he somehow hinges his argument on that fact also. Moreover, let us be very clear. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm no expert on Hong Kong, but I do know that the British, since the 19th century, when they were there was not a jot of democracy on what was then the barren rock. And now that democracy is coming, what is the impulse now that we've brought it this far and now we want a little more?
You see, that is always a possibility in societies in transition, and whether democratic transformation is taking place. As you correctly said, from a position where there was not a trace of democracy, Hong Kong has traveled a lot. Now it's a question, as I said in the beginning, it's a question of finessing it. And there what happens is, once the lid is open, then they start seeing the sky, and sky is the limit, So the impression I have is that the majority opinion in Hong Kong is not favoring this path of agitation, and would rather prefer incremental. There is a dimension in terms of the age, that is the youth and the older people, adults and senior citizens. There is also a divide in terms of class working there. For example, the middle class and the entrepreneurial community there, they do not want, they don't favor this kind of agitation. Tourism industry is up in arms against this. So you see, we are moving towards a situation where this will peter out. I think so. This is the reading I get. I want to make a few comments about the economic situation. I think it is true that the growth, statistically, the growth rate has fallen. But then when you analyze this, you also have to analyze it in terms of what is happening in the world economy, number one. Secondly, there is a certain shift, structural shift, that is taking place in China. What they have themselves adopted is that they are careering away after realizing an export-oriented growth strategy towards one of triggering domestic consumption, and thereby having a sustained, and it suits them, in fact, to lower the growth rate.
No, but how are you linking that to the agitation?
No, I am only referring to your initial remark that there is a thing. No, the economic dimension is still, you were not prepared to believe it in the beginning side, but there is indeed this problem. It works psychologically of an entity which was the locomotive, and then is rolled back as the fourth or fifth wagon in the train. Now that has its psychological impact. So it's really not the shining beacon of mainland China. In fact, it is not the driver of growth for China as it used to be at that time, because this was the showcase. Not only the showcase, this was also the window for attracting capital. This was also a place which was generating a lot of income. But now the point is, it is taking its due place as I said, the third or fourth wagon. behind. Now, this works psychologically. Indeed, it works psychologically. So, the economic dimension which I mentioned in the beginning was in that sense. I never meant that Hong Kong is inconsequential.
Right.
It's in relative terms.
Relative
terms.
It has been, yeah.
So, you see, when you speak about the trajectory of democracy, you find this in all situations. And this is not a solemn promise on the violation of which Britain can complain much about, because Britain's record is abysmal in Hong Kong. What was it that it used to do? It used to give knighthoods to a clutch of people and make them rule the country, and they would deliver as poodles whatever Britain wanted from London. So, this was the system that was there.
Professor Muni, he says that the British gave them all sorts of knighthoods, and they wagged their tails whenever the master was there. Now, Xi Jinping has invited 70 tycoons to Beijing to do roughly, not, I hope it's not, is there a comparison or?
No. They don't go to knighthoods. The simple fact is that the Chinese state today is standing by the tycoons in Hong Kong. And it is true that any disturbance there would adversely affect the operations of the tycoons, the business operations. In fact, there are suggestions, all kind of suggestions coming up, that they should stop mainland tourists to come to Hong Kong. So that will affect the small businesses, and therefore small businesses would turn against the agitators and resist them, largely because of the economic effect. So this is how the Chinese state is trying to handle it. My problem is that why it is that once they promised what you call one country, two systems, why they are hesitating from this two system to unfold itself as it should. And why they are worried about is, Prabhat mentioned Tibet and Xinjiang. I would even link it up to what you call the Jasmine Revolution, 2011. In terms of Twitter, social media, there was quite a considerable stir for a few weeks, and then it died out in one way or the other. And that is which the Beijing rulers are really worried about. And they have stopped the filtration of Hong Kong developments to the mainland as far as possible. It is not, I mean, in today's world, it is not possible really to completely insulate any event of that order. But the whole idea is that if the idea of democracy catches up, spreads up, the germs of that are already in China.
Right.
There are thousands of revolts against the system in various ways. President Xi understands that. She in fact is trying to liberalize, is fighting the corruption largely to say, look, I am with the people, so on and so forth. He promises some reform, some liberalization. To what extent he would be able to go remains to be seen. But all these efforts are really to make sure that the virus of democracy does not spread in China, because then it would be a problem unmanageable almost for any leadership.
Let's look at it this way, Prabhat. China has grown exponentially, and it has grown despite the West. It has grown with the, well, I mean, you might say that there's been business, but it has grown with incurring a great deal of traditional Western envy, the way it has catapulted as a super economic model, definitely an economic power. Now, there has always been, at this casino table, there is somebody like Banco's ghost standing behind the leadership in Taiwan. There's Banco's ghost behind whoever is in operation here, and there already is in Xinjiang, also in Tibet. There are foreign interests also. Everybody is not taking very kindly to the Chinese. They would like the Chinese to make mistakes, and therefore there is a great deal of what, therefore you have even a magazine like Economist talk about the fear in China about black hands. black hands, we used to call them black legs. They call them black hands. In other words, agents who would play into the hand of the foreigner. These are the sorts of fears that people in Beijing, I suspect, do have, don't they? And are these suspicions not to be taken lightly?
Look, they do have such fears, and what will feed into this very nicely is a news report I saw, I think yesterday, that the best-selling biography of any foreign leader in China is Putin's, and the author who wrote that book has written, I think, 2 others or 3 others, including Margaret Thatcher, and he says none of them has sold the way this one has sold. So obviously, look, I've been making this point repeatedly, that the more these 2 countries, Russia and China, are either isolated or brought under pressure, either from outside or for internal reasons, the more they will turn to each other, and this is something we really must factor in our policy making, especially vis-a-vis Russia. Now, having said that, let me just go back to one of the points that we were discussing. What was the trigger for this agitation? It was a white paper that was released in Beijing in early June, which laid out the framework. And if you read that white paper, and I have some excerpts from it, they are very clearly making the point that between the 2 postulates, 1 country, 2 systems, it's 1 country that will now predominate. 2 systems, look, they say it very clearly. The 1 country is the premise and basis of the 2 systems, and the 2 systems is subordinate to and derived from 1 country. Now, this is not something which is either in the original Sino-British Joint Declaration or in the Basic Law. And I think this is the sort of creeping reinterpretation, or I wanted to say expansion of the powers of the Beijing government,
or reformulation,
which is, or the whatever, which is leading to these kind of agitations. Are there foreign hands in it? Look, I'd be surprised if people were not fishing in troubled waters. They inevitably do. So does China. Now, as far as the economics,
why don't we, Prabhat? Sorry for that digression.
I agree with the import of your question. I wish we would. Sure, I'm totally with you.
I interrupted your chain of thought.
On the there are 2 other points I wanted to make. Firstly, even during Tiananmen, which was frankly, in hindsight, an open and shut case, they had to crush it. Even at that time, there were leadership splits, and at the very level of the General Secretary, Zhao Ziyang was not in favor of a crackdown. Li Peng was in favor of a crackdown. I am already beginning to see evidence that on the question of how to handle Hong Kong, and by the way, also how to handle India, there are leadership differences in Beijing. Now, this is something which
any evidence that you can cite?
Certainly. Oh, certainly. Look, as far as India is concerned, this would be a very unusual development. Xi Jinping made an unusual statement with regard to the border settlement. If you read the earlier joint statements, they're very bland, that we should explore a formulation, a framework for a settlement and encourage these special representatives. None of that this time. It's clear cut. Both sides are committed to a border settlement as a strategic priority. It's a very strong formulation. And in his own press conference, Xi Jinping said something quite unusual, which is that we will find a border settlement at an early date. And
Prabhat,
this particular formulation,
your point of view, then
it's this particular.
I'm getting signals here.
Well, since you asked, I answered.
Yeah.
The point then I would make is that, as far as the economy is concerned, this notion that they're going to switch to being led by domestic consumption. The first Prime Minister to say this was Zhu Rongji more than 10 years ago. Right. And domestic consumption has been going steadily down, still is going down. So the model is not responding to the stated objectives, number one. Number two, I would question your hypothesis that the West actually tried to prevent China from growing rapidly. The Americans in particular have been the most powerful factor behind the rapid growth of the Chinese economy.
Let me ask you then the next question related to that. Are the Americans and everybody in the West, would they like the agitation in Hong Kong to succeed or fail?
My guess would be that Britain has no sympathy with the agitation. And in fact, the British Prime Minister has come in for criticism from many people, including the newspapers within Britain.
Yeah.
My estimate would be that Obama's White House would not have much sympathy either.
Would not either. Final question to just last few minutes left, Bhadran and Professor Muni. You know, you talked about this, they are going to constitute a school of about 1,200 candidates, this pool from which will have been cleared by local committees. Now, you being an expert on Iran as well, this reminds me of the Iranian model. I mean, there is exactly this, you will not, the contestants will first be cleared by the guidance council, and then it is free for all democracy. Is there a comparison?
Saeed, I have always appreciated you because you finally come out with the tantalizing question. You are absolutely spot on. So what does this bring us to? It brings us to this: what is the yardstick we are applying for democracy? In this discussion, what is the yardstick? Are we applying the yardstick of Westminster style democracy? In that case, do we practice in India?
Yes. We
That's
ask
the question.
final, Muni, from your experience in Singapore. You know what Lee Kuan Yew always said: there will be a local indigenous model. This business of transplantation of models is over.
Fair enough, but all I want to underline is that people in that part of the world are now opening up. You know, look at Thailand.
Will they open up in Singapore?
Look at yes, of course.
Will they?
Yes, they have. They have. By the way, the last presidential election in Singapore gave jitters to the ruling party. The kind of narrow margin with which their president won was, and the opposition party has got much more seats now than ever in the parliament.
On that very interesting note, thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for this very interesting discussion that we've had on. There's so much else always. There are so many things in the heart which we cannot complete in a half-hour discussion, but we are grateful. We are grateful for small mercies. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Bhadra Kr